Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host and head witch, Miss Solaris BlueRaven at the helm this evening. Want to give a shout out to everybody at Revolution Radio, staff, producers, listeners, chat room, and thank everybody for tuning in tonight. We are listener supported, so if you like what you're listening to, please click on the donate button. We appreciate your support and thank you for any contributions you can make to this wonderful station. I think Nighthawk has his special going on for a $100 donation. You can receive a Jumbo Emergency Food Survival Seed Pack. So by donating $100, you will be helping out the station and also possibly securing your future and being prepared for whatever comes down the pike. So that's a good deal. I also will be taking calls in the second hour. The number is 347-688-2902 or Freedom Screen on Skype. And you are listening to Studio A. My special guest this evening is David Weatherly. I'll provide you with his bio. David Weatherly is a paranormal investigator, author, and world explorer. For over 35 years, he has pursued the world of the strange, investigating cases around the country and abroad. He has written and lectured on a diverse range of topics, including cryptozoology, ancient mysteries, Ufology, hauntings, shamanism, and psychic phenomena. At a young age, David became fascinated with ancient mysteries and the paranormal. Early influences such as John Keel, Holzer, and Eric von Daniken set him on a course to spend his life exploring the unexplained. David has also studied shamanic and magical traditions with elders from numerous cultures, including Europe, Tibet, Native America, and Africa. He has studied a range of energy systems from shamanic techniques to Hawaiian Huna and QiGong healing. He has studied with Taoist masters in China, had an audience with the Dali Lama, and is a Reiki master. David is also an accomplished martial artist and has taught Ninjutsu and Filipino martial arts. David has been a featured speaker at various conferences, including the Paradigm Symposium, Sacramento Paranormal Summit, and the Alamo UFO Conference. He has lectured for the Association for Research and Enlightenment, Carolina Shamanic Institute, and various paranormal and spiritual groups around the country. He has been a guest on a wide range of programs, including Coast to Coast AM, Dreamland with Whitley Strieber, Veritas, Darkness Radio, and Project White Paper. David has written for numerous publications and is a regular contributor to Intrepid magazine. He is the author of The Black-Eyed Children and Strange Intruders, and his website is twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com, and you can also get his books at leprechaunpress.com books. Okay, so please welcome David to the show this evening. David, how are you doing?
I'm great, Solaris. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thanks. It's a pleasure to have you on tonight. So thanks for coming on board and sharing your information with us this evening. So let's just get right to it and talk about your research and how you got involved in what you're writing about with the Black-Eyed Children and your other book.
Well, I got involved with these topics, as you mentioned in the bio, at a pretty young age. And, grew up in a rural area of North Carolina, but I was just fascinated and intrigued with off-the-wall things, for that time period. We're talking about, showing my age a little bit, but, when I was growing up in the 70s, it was not part of popular culture like it is today. So you would mention, ghosts or UFOs or things like that, and you usually got sort of a sideways look, and people wouldn't want to indulge you too much. So it took a lot of effort back in the early days of my career to sort of root out this information and get people comfortable to, into a space where they'd start talking about different things that I was interested in. And, growing up, I always say that these kind of things, they find you, regardless of where you are. So my personal story for that is that I lived in an area where really no one was interested in these kind of things at all. And, we didn't even have a bookstore in the town. I had to go pretty far to find a bookstore. And, of course, there wasn't a whole lot during that period that was easily obtainable. Von Daniken's material came out, talking about ancient astronauts in the 70s. And that was pretty eye-opening and intriguing for me. But, lo and behold, this elderly couple moved into a house very close to ours, and when I went over and started talking to this woman on a regular basis, and I found out that she was a spiritualist, and at the time I wasn't even completely sure what that was, and she started telling me more about it, and she's probably the only spiritualist in the state at that time, but it was pretty intriguing because here was somebody who had some knowledge in these areas, and she introduced me to Fate magazine. And for anybody who remembers Fate magazine, it was a little digest size magazine when it originally came out, and just ran a whole wide range of articles on haunted sites and cryptozoology and just everything within this whole spectrum. And when I found that, it was sort of revealing, because all of a sudden I realized, wow, there are a lot of people out here who are researching these things and really pursuing it. And since then, I've done the same thing and never really looked back.
It's fascinating. And what year did you start investigating the black-eyed children? What year did that start to pop up?
The black-eyed children specifically, they first showed up in the late 90s, the sort of modern era of sightings is what I like to term it. And early days of the internet, there was a story posted by a Texas journalist named Brian Bethel. And his account is hands down probably the most widely known story of the black-eyed kids. Bethel was out one night to pay a bill at a late-night drop box. He was parked in a strip center parking lot, and he was sitting in his car writing his check. These two boys approached his car, and he was initially nervous. He wasn't sure why, but something just made him feel uneasy. So even from the beginning, he only rolled his window down just a crack and sort of asked, what do you want? And these two boys proceeded to tell him that they needed a ride. They needed a ride back home. They had forgotten their money and needed to go back and get their money because they wanted to see a movie. And as this conversation is unfolding, Bethel is feeling a little bit more and more uneasy. He does have the mindset, however, to glance over at the marquee, and he realizes that the last show of this movie is already, an hour into it. So nothing makes sense about this encounter and what the boys are saying. They're using phrases like, come on, mister, we're just a couple of little kids. Trying to sort of set him at ease, which only serves to make him more nervous. And as he is trying to think this through and looking more closely at these boys, they finally make eye contact with him, and at that point he realizes their eyes are solid black. That's the final straw. He basically pulls away and gets out of the parking lot as quickly as he can, and he does glance back as soon as he pulls out of the spot, and these kids have vanished. They're nowhere in sight. So that was sort of a final puzzling exclamation point on what he had just encountered. He wasn't sure how to what to make of the situation. He was really shaken up and unnerved, and he ended up posting his account on the internet. It really resonated with people. Other people came on and started posting their own encounters with black-eyed kids and a few with black-eyed adults. And, it seemed that all of a sudden there were a whole range of these encounters out there. Now, Bethel's account, I had seen that in the 90s, being interested in all aspects of the paranormal. I sort of watched these things and thought, wow, some of these stories are pretty intriguing, but it's one of those things you're not sure what to make of it. It could be a modern urban legend. It could be, just some mistaken identity, something unusual. But the accounts seem to just keep multiplying. I sort of kept an eye on it, but didn't really pursue it or anything until quite a few years later. A gentleman that I knew, his story is well documented in my book. His name is Paul, and I refer to Paul as a John Wayne character to give you an idea of what this guy was like. He was, somewhere in the range of 6'3", 6'4". He was a martial artist, bodybuilder. He was a prison guard. And this is the guy who has never been afraid of anything in his life. He was also a complete skeptic about anything paranormal. He was well aware of what I did. I would see him on a regular basis, and he could not resist making cracks about it. Hey, you catch any flying saucers this week? You spot Bigfoot and all these types of things. And over the years, you learn that people like that can't leave it alone. There's usually some reason on a personal level, something that haunts them. Mm-hmm. And, you learn to just sort of wait it out. And that's what I did with Paul. And sure enough, he caught me having lunch one day and joined me. And he suddenly opened up with his story. And his story was that he had encountered a pair of these black-eyed kids at his home. Totally shook him up. He went through a really terrifying situation by his account, and he didn't know how to come to terms with it. He wanted an explanation. So, all of a sudden the little bells are ringing in the filing cabinet of my mind, and I'm thinking, wow, these encounters have been going on. Here's a direct witness that I've got in front of me, so I can look at this a little bit more closely. And so that's what I started to do. And I started to collect accounts from all over the country and eventually all over the world, and just pursued trying to figure out exactly what was going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how many cases have you investigated? And what is the location? What is the primarily hotspot for this activity, would you say? Or is there one?
There's not one anymore. When I first started gathering the accounts, there seemed to be a few hotspots. The Midwest, Texas, and the Pacific Northwest, all the way down into Northern California. Now, over time, that has become less and less of those have become not as primary, because accounts continue to flood in about these children. And, it's fascinating because I'm not the only investigator who collects these things. I know several other guys who do. And, I get these accounts on a daily basis. So do these other people. And they're hearing different accounts than I hear. So the rate that these things have multiplied is phenomenal. And, some of the accounts, on any given week, I'll get accounts from people who say, oh, this happened to me 6 years ago or 2 months ago or 10 years ago. And it's a wide range. But usually it's a situation where people have been traumatized, essentially, by these encounters, and they can't shake it, and they've never been able to come to terms with exactly what happened.
That's interesting. So is there a kind of a vibe that these kids put out? Is it an ominous presence? I mean, what's the vibration? It must, or is there one?
It's pretty sinister. Usually what I hear repeatedly from people is that they feel like they were in the presence of something sinister. Some people say they feel like they were in front of a predator, which is a very curious statement to make about what appears to be, for instance, a 10-year-old boy. So there's something going on a deeper level that is affecting these people. And I've identified essentially 3 stages that happen to a victim or a witness, whichever term you're comfortable with, during one of these encounters. The first is that from the very get-go, the person feels uneasy. Even just opening the door and there's a child standing there, normally that shouldn't bother us, but the people who are having these encounters, right from the get-go, they feel uneasy. That uneasiness quickly develops to an outright nervous feeling. And usually somewhere during the course of this encounter, these children will look up and make eye contact. And, or something will happen that the person suddenly realizes these kids have solid black eyes. And that usually is the tipping point that pushes that nervousness from just a nervous energy to outright fear. And all they can think of is getting away from these kids as quick as possible. The flight response kicks in, and they just want to get away.
And do they show up in the daytime, or is it primarily at night?
A good portion of the encounters seem to happen late afternoon, early evening. So, right in that period when the sun is starting to go down, seems to be the most classic period for manifestations. There are accounts, of daytime sightings, early mornings, late nights. So it's a wide range. But certainly when I did the initial research and collected all these accounts, that was one of the few patterns that emerged, was that they seemed to show up right at sunset.
It's wild. And what is their attire? Are they? Do they look like they're from this timeline, or?
It varies a little bit. And first of all, let me give you the physical description for people who aren't familiar with these stories, because we really didn't cover that. What we're looking at is children that usually fall within the age range of 8 to early teens. And the age I probably hear the most is 10 years old. Now, bear in mind, a lot of those accounts are from people who don't have children themselves, so they're sort of estimating, they look to be about 10 years old. But it gives you an idea of what these kids appear to be anyway. Their skin is usually described as being very pale or pasty. People will use terms like it looked artificial. Oddly enough, no one has ever noticed a blemish on the skin of these kids. No freckles, no pimples, no acne, nothing. And, again, we're talking about kids right in those preteen years, so you would expect a lot of those types of things. Never heard that reported. The eyes are solid black. We're talking about the entire eye, not just the pupil. The entire sclera is black. Much like the depictions of the gray aliens is what people, sometimes reference. Just these black, shiny orbs. Typically, the kids will show up in very drab or monotone clothing. I've never heard a report, for instance, of one of these kids wearing, a yellow shirt or a red jacket or anything like that. It's always drab grays and browns and blacks and things like that. Typically, they'll show up at the door and they'll be, hanging their heads, looking down at their shoes or looking at the ground, and they'll start to talk. On occasion, there are people who will say that the clothing looks ill-fitting, as if it was hand-me-down clothing, or a few people have described them as looking like street kids. So they got the clothes from somewhere that were donated and they weren't quite right for them. There are some cases where people will report that the clothing looks Amish, is a term I've heard several times, or handmade. So again, it seems to be a theme of it's either a very drab, nondescript clothing, or it's clothing that's doesn't quite work right. It's not quite right for the kid. They will speak in a very monotone fashion. They often repeat the same phrases over and over again. They won't respond to direct questions. Usually what they'll do is, if you ask a direct question, they'll simply repeat another phrase that they've already said. And the whole goal each time is there's always this contrived way they have to try to get you to invite them inside. That's literally what they say, just invite us in.
That's interesting. We have a question in the chat. It looks like a question, but also we don't hear of any accounts of people who have let them in. So people, have they let them in or not?
There's one account in the book, and it's a fairly long story. We can go into it if you want to, but for the most part, no, we do not hear accounts of people letting these kids in. I can tell you that I get emails all the time because there are a handful of stories that circulate on the internet about someone inviting a black-eyed child in, and this happens or that happens. I don't know anything about those accounts. I haven't been able to interview those people or determine the veracity of those accounts at all. I can tell you that in all of the accounts that I've collected and the people I've interviewed, it seems that the closer the proximity to these kids, the worse the consequences are. So, in other words, there have been a few cases that I have found where someone has reached out and touched one of these children, or one of these kids reached out and touched them, and the consequences are usually pretty nasty. The person typically becomes very ill in the aftermath. They will experience very sudden turns of bad luck. A whole string of negative things will happen to them, and it leaves a lot of questions. You have to wonder, are these children an omen of these things coming, or did their presence actually create this negativity? Or did the person's mindset create the negativity because of the experience with these kids? It's really it's sort of fascinating, but we really honestly don't have answers.
Right. Well, it's interesting too, and I guess you could go and look at the profile, the backgrounds of the people who have witnessed this, and see, what their backgrounds are. Now, you said one was a law enforcement jail guard, so it sounds like they're semi-stable people for the most part. Is there any type of parallel that goes with the witnesses insofar as their personalities, backgrounds, or professions?
It was one of the first things I looked for. Has an investigator of this type of phenomena, I always look for patterns, to try to connect things together and say, oh, okay, this is curious. When I started collecting these accounts, I was sort of surprised at the lack of connections amongst the witnesses, because we were seeing a wide range in geographical location, age of the witness, spiritual belief if they had any, and it was sort of confounding at first. And the more accounts I collected, the fewer patterns there seemed to be, except for one, which was very curious. It seemed that a large portion of people who were encountering these kids were people who worked in some type of authority position. So in other words, there were a lot of law enforcement personnel, military personnel, government employees, and it was enough that it emerged as a pattern, but really wasn't sure what to make of it. It was intriguing in that, as you say, these are people that are, they're pretty stable, they're pretty dependable. A lot of these people are trained observers. Certainly a law enforcement officer typically is going to notice a lot more details, than somebody working at Walmart, for instance. So it was really interesting to interview a lot of these people and hear the specific things that they could remember and the massive details that they had noticed. Why those particular people, I simply don't know. It'll be interesting to see, over the years, if that pattern also holds with the increase in sightings that are coming in.
Right. And another question in the chat was basically, or a confirmation perhaps, we have no accounts of people who have actually helped them or let them in. Is that correct?
As I stated, there's one in the book. It takes up a whole chapter.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And has anybody captured any footage, any pictures, video, anything like that?
That's a curious question. First of all, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that because, one, it's so simple to, sit down and in a few seconds on Photoshop create a picture of a black-eyed kid. You can Google it on the net, you'll find tons and tons of them. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock in photographs that did come forward purporting to be that, unless there were really interesting circumstances behind it. Now, that being said, what I have found very curious in a number of situations where these kids manifested in locations that had security cameras present, there were situations where the cameras would not operate. They would have shut down, or they would have lost power. There's a whole range of things. It seemed like electronic interference is something that has manifested on a lot of occasions when these kids have shown up. And that certainly seems to be the case when security cameras are running. So, I'll give you that for what it is.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially with any type of paranormal activity or anything else. I mean, electrical gets shut down. That's interesting. So what do you suspect it might be? I mean, what is your take on these kids? What are they? Where are they from, or what do they want?
My personal opinion is not in the book. I wrote the book and I tried to be very objective and just present the different theories and the different reasons this theory could fit and that theory could fit. One of the things I found really intriguing when I researched the topic was that these kids, you could argue that they are manifestations of a lot of different types of paranormal phenomena. For instance, they have things in common with demonic entities. They have things in common with alien hybrids, ghosts, a whole wide range of things. And I really tried to put all of that out there and let people decide for themselves with the book. Now, all that being said, obviously I do have a personal opinion, and what I think at this point is that they are some type of interdimensional being that's coming through into our world, essentially. I don't think they have a good agenda. I'm not sure what it is, but there's some evidence, to me at least, that they actually feed off the emotions that they generate in people. And, for anybody listening that thinks, oh, this sounds really out there, let me explain a couple things. One is that scientists the last 10 years have really been talking about this idea of parallel worlds, parallel universes. Quantum scientists are now pretty convinced that there are other dimensions out there. And, essentially their theories have proven it. Now, we don't know exactly where they are, and these scientists will say, okay, we know there are 12 other dimensions. We don't know how to get to them or how to access them or where they are, but we know they're there. Well, if you go back to a lot of tribal lore from around the world, you'll find that native cultures have talked about that idea for thousands of years. And just because we can't get to those other dimensions doesn't mean that something in there can't get to where we are. That's sort of where I am with this situation. And in terms of the energy that is transpiring during these things, again, scientists has finally come around to age-old beliefs and said, oh, okay, we've proven there's a human energy field, and the body generates energy. And, some pretty fascinating work out there that shows that different levels of emotion will generate different levels of energy in the human body. Obviously, a sudden spike in fear is going to be a pretty high level of energy. I find it intriguing that in a very large portion of these encounters, once the victim reaches that peak of fear and the flight response kicks in, these kids vanish. There are accounts where a law enforcement officer will see these kids and turn around to knock on the door, and when he looks back, they're gone. So, we have to look at that data and question, what is it, why exactly did they disappear like that at that moment? And certainly, how did they do it? So if they're somehow shifting in and out from some other dimensional level, then that could explain that.
Yeah, it does. Well, the vibration, yeah, totally. Thinking about, this is really interesting when I think about this, but so many different realms of consciousness. And I mean, right now we're dealing with a planet that's, well, we would discuss this a little bit, a very, very toxic situation on the Earth right now with a lot of negativity. So that could be a possibility that people are subconsciously pulling in these energies just from the negative energetics that are being spewed around the planet, That's one theory anyway.
I absolutely think that's a possibility. And, if you look at, certainly, look at the time period that we're in and the level of negativity and the level of fear. Really, that's, not just in America, but all over the world. And, if you correlate that with a lot of these strange things that are going on, I think the two certainly do go hand in hand, and they are influencing each other. So absolutely, that could be one of the reasons that these, beings, whatever they are, I don't think they're really kids for a moment. I think that could be a reason that they are manifesting now and in such great numbers. Right.
Yeah, they sound very demonic. That's the only thing that comes to mind. Very ominous and definitely bad. Nothing
That's
positive.
Probably the two most popular theories are that they are some kind of alien hybrid, or that they are some type of demonic entity. And there's actually a lot of people who sort of fall right in the middle and think that they're both.
Right.
And it's very possible we're looking at multiple beings, with all these accounts, because there is such a large number of them now.
Wow. So do you think it's escalated since you've been researching this? You think this year's perhaps has been, would you say it's increased a little bit, or no, about the same?
Yeah, I think it has. I think it has. I always sort of hesitate a little bit when I say that real definitively, because, it's interesting, as I referenced earlier, paranormal has become such a part of pop culture now that, we're getting a lot of different things. I always tell people, when I was young and started in this field, if I walked in a party and said I was a paranormal investigator, I was pretty much guaranteeing that I would have a lot of solitary time the rest of the night, And now if I walk into a party and say that, they're lined up out the door because everybody has a story.
Right.
And everybody's heard a bump or a creak, or thinks that, Aunt Mildred has visited them in the middle of the night. Right. And it's funny, we take the good and the bad being in this field. I actually like the level of acceptance that it has now. It's just that you always have to sort of weed through, okay, this is probably, a mistaken situation, or this is a hoax, or this is, somebody just telling a good yarn. And you take all those things, but with that, you also get a lot of people who have genuine experiences and are willing to now discuss that with other people and say, oh my gosh, I experienced that, I saw that. And I think that's what we're seeing with the massive increase in these accounts. Part of it is people are finally opening up, because I tell you, Solaris, at least once a week I get an email from someone who says, oh my God, I heard this interview with you. I never knew that somebody else had seen something like this, but here's my story. And, all of these accounts, they pretty much fall into this very typical range. It's interesting because there are some very defined standards in these encounters. The kids, they're always trying to get inside or get something out of the person, and they're always putting off this creepy vibe. So there are some things that are pretty much standard, but then you hear variations too, and that's where it gets really interesting. Because the kids will use different phrases, or they'll do things slightly different, and that's all more data to kind of look at and examine in terms of the overall picture of these things. And it's important too to occasionally people will scoff at this whole idea, but you have to understand that there are a number of things going on here. One is this level of fear that is generated in the victims. Something is going on a physical and psychological and even psychic level, because the people are describing things to me that sound like, almost like the experience of infrasound being blasted at them and things like that, with what's going on in their physical bodies. And then there's the psychological aspect, because, here you are in a situation, as an adult, we're hardwired to help kids. And, all of a sudden, here you are as an adult in a situation where, a 10-year-old kid is asking you for help, and all the red flags are going off. Your body is saying, get away, something's wrong. But all of the physical manifestations, until you see the eyes usually, all the physical manifestations is just some, lonely kid standing here who needs a ride. And there's a psychological battle that goes on, and these people, it really traumatizes them. I had people tell me these accounts, and they're saying, I didn't know what to do. As a little kid, and I felt like I was supposed to help this kid, but I couldn't do it. My body was freezing up. I was shaking. All these things were going on. So it's any time you insert children into the paranormal, whether it's the ghost of a child at a location, or whatever it is, things take on a different atmosphere, and it becomes very unsettling. It's one of the things that Hollywood has really capitalized on in the last few years, by making all these horror movies with the child as the focal point of the evil energy, of the negativity, and it's unnerving.
Yeah. They have. What reminds me also is that was an X-Files episode where they had the black-eyed children, or something with the black oil, something similar to that.
Yeah, they had a whole series with an alien entity that was, I think they referred to it as the black oil alien, and it was something that would go into a person's body, and it would go over the eyes at one point and turn the eyes solid black. It's one of the earliest uses of that imagery on television that I found.
Right, yeah.
And remembered, but certainly it's become very popular to use in the last couple of years.
Right, I've heard people. Yeah, I've heard some people talk about it, insofar as even my labs and things like that. But I really can't prove any of it. But it's very interesting nonetheless. But they almost sound like little spirits. But you haven't had any hitchers follow you home, have you, or interference in your house in any form? Investigating this?
No, not really.
Okay.
I did have a series. Well, I'd have to say yes, I have, in a sense. It wasn't something that followed me home, but it was a very curious series of incidents that happened after the book was published. And it involves a lot of electronic interference and almost a Men in Black type of connection. It was one of the chapters in the book was about the connections between the black-eyed kids and the men in black. Because, again, you have a situation where, strange figures showing up at the door, speaking in monotone fashion, pale skin. So, a little bit of odd similarities there. Confusion over normal everyday objects has shown up a few times in black-eyed kid encounters. And what happened for me was that a short time after the book came out, I received an email, and it was one of those, that starts off, now don't think I'm crazy, and that's always the flip of the coin when I get one of those. But this particular woman, she described a situation where she had started reading a book, and her smoke alarm went off in her house. Wasn't fire, wasn't any smoke, nothing, so she shuts it off. And the next day she sits down, she starts reading the book again, and this is the Black-Eyed Children book. The timer on her oven goes off, and she said that she didn't even know what it was at first because she never uses the thing. So she gets up and she cuts that off. And the third incident was that she was sitting reading the book, and her garage door opened itself. And she put the book down and emailed me, and she said, look, I'm interested in this, but I don't want any visits. This is really weird. Has anybody else reported this? Now, at the time, that was the first report of anything like this. And the only thing I was having that was remotely similar was that I noticed that I was doing a lot of interviews on various radio shows and podcasts, and I could go on and talk about cryptozoology or haunted sites or whatever, but sure enough, when we started talking about these darn kids, weird things would start happening. We'd get cut off, there'd be electronic interference. The Whitley Streeter interview, he was in his home studio and was just completely confounded by some of the stuff going on. He literally said to me, he said, I've never seen this happen before. The volume levels were dropping up and down, weird things were happening to his soundboard. And during that interview, we talked about both the black-eyed kids and the men in black. And Whitley, in fact, it was the first time he told his own story of an encounter with a black-eyed child. So, this seemed to continue, but then it got even more interesting because I was sitting at home one day and got a call on my cell phone. It was a number I recognized. It was a friend and fellow investigator in Kentucky. And I answered the phone, and it was nothing but static. And I thought, okay, a bad connection. It rang back a little bit later. The same thing happened. And, this began to occur on a regular basis. I was getting constant calls from him. And, whether I was around or not, if I wasn't around, there'd be a long message left on the phone that would just be like garbled noises and background sounds and everything. And, finally, I just had been really busy. And finally, I sat down and I listened to one of these one day. And I said, I got to get to the bottom of this. This keeps happening. So I hear what sounded like a child's voice in the background. And I thought, okay, there's the answer. He's left his phone where his kid could get it. And, his child keeps dialing my number. So send him an email, let him know. So, hey, man, I think your child's getting your phone. You keep calling my number over and over again in the past week. And, I get a profuse apology. Oh, sorry, it won't happen again. So, of course, it does. And, these calls continue. And, in fact, they get even stranger because, I'll wake up in the morning and the phone would have, been dialed at 4 a.m. and things like that. And, I let him know this is still going on. He couldn't explain it. I couldn't explain it. And finally, I get an email from him one night about 5 minutes after one of these calls comes in. And the email says, essentially, oh, my God, I was laying on my bed reading this black-eyed kid book, and my phone was beside me. No one was touching it. I saw it light up and dial your number just on its own. And he was really kind of freaked out, and he was like, "This is too weird," because now it's the first time he had seen it actually happen. So the next day he goes to his cell phone provider and he explains the situation. The cell phone guys look it over, the techs look it over. Nobody can explain it. There's no explanation. They've never heard of it before. There's no way they can stop it from doing it because they don't know how it's doing it or why it's doing it. So it continues for a few more days until he goes, his name is Jeff. Jeff goes on a road trip. And during this road trip, his phone was on the dash of his car. It lit up and called me one final time. And it was at the moment that he drove into Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Point Pleasant is the site of the infamous Mothman sightings. It's the location that John Keel spent a lot of time investigating, had encounters with men in black during that period who told him to, leave the Mothman and UFOs alone, and, just all sorts of weird things going on in that time period. So it was just, the whole incident was just so damned odd, and it was sort of an exclamation point on a whole strange, I don't know what they were, signals or communications or something, and it was as if some cosmic jester was saying, "Ha, see, we can do this whenever we want, however we want," and here's something to send you deeper down the rabbit hole, and now think about this, and so it stopped after that. That was it.
Wow. Yeah, I wonder if they aren't connected to the Mothman. That's something to look at, isn't it? What's your take on the Mothman?
It's possible, just because a lot of people believe these kids are some kind of omen, and certainly that's what the Mothman seemed to have been. The Mothman showed up in a whole series of bizarre sightings that culminated with the collapse of the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, and a lot of people lost their lives, and a lot of people think that the sighting stopped after that point, but they in fact did not. There have been other sightings of the Mothman. I think that it is some type of manifestation that is definitely connected to impending disasters on whatever level.
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense, David. When I think about it, especially looking at the world once again and all this stuff that's going on the planet, I mean, it sounds to me like this is an impending kind of doom that's hovering around us, and perhaps that's a reflection of that. Maybe people should tune in a little bit more to these omens, because they're there for a reason. We're not alone on this world. So
absolutely, and I think that again is a very clear connection. It's fascinating to look at that aspect of it, and then reflect on the fact that so many of these encounters are happening to, again, law enforcement, people in the military or government, and the governments in this world, they're just becoming more and more oppressive, and while a lot of the masses are sort of just ignoring a lot of those facts and focused on American Idol, or who's winning The Voice or whatever, there are more and more people who are waking up and saying, "No, something's going on here," and it's just a rapid downhill track that we're on, and some things have to turn around and have to change, or we're in for some very major disasters if not.
I agree with that, and we had that discussion too. We've both been feeling the red flag energy, and I certainly have, and I can't shake it off at all. So I'm well aware that something's coming down the pike, and that's just the way it is. I mean, and you're very psychic, obviously, very trained, so you obviously pick up on the same thing, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's been one of those things that's sort of nagging at me, and it's just grown in intensity, over the last year or two. I didn't really put any stock into the whole 2012 thing, because I've studied with a lot of Native elders, and I've talked to Mayan elders and so forth, and knew the whole thing was just sort of needless hype. A lot of silliness around the whole 2012 end of the world type of thing. But in some ways, it's like it was almost designed as a distraction to say, "Oh, okay, end of the world, big laugh, it's everybody get ready," and that just sort of diverted a lot of people's attention away from the fact that, we are experiencing a lot of negative things, and the amount of cover-ups and the amount of people that ignore what's going on is just mind-boggling to me. I mean, you and I were talking about this earlier off the air, and it's just incredible. It really is. I mean, Fukushima alone. People. I talk to people all the time and tell them about this, and a lot of times the response you get is, "Oh, you mean that thing in Japan like a long time ago?" Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's still spewing radioactive waste into the ocean because the Japanese government is too proud to ask for help or to admit that it screwed up royally, and they're dumping their waste. They're having people die in incredible numbers from cancer. radioactive fish are showing up on the coast of California. This is not just something that is affecting Japan. This is affecting the entire world, and it's not stopping. It's the same thing that happened in the Gulf with the oil spill, but it is in fact much worse because, it's on a much wider scale. And, these are things that people need to wake up and start paying attention to.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, it's horrible what's happening to our planet. And, it reminds me of the BP spill. That was horrible. And it was just the beginning. That seemed like it was one of the beginnings of the bad omen, things happening to the environment. And such neglect on so many different levels. But you're right, they were too proud to do anything about it. And honestly, it's really sickening to me to watch this stuff going, across the globe like this. It's horrible. But, just for an example, this afternoon I was talking to a few people, upper middle class people, educated, careers, professionals. They have no clue what chemtrails are. I mean, literally, everybody's in la la land. And I've been a voice for so much information. I just kind of throw up my hands at some point. You just kind of like say, okay, well,
yeah,
it's amazing.
It's funny, I was in Texas when the Gulf spill happened, and it was amazing to me that the propaganda that the oil companies were circulating and the things they were telling people. And, a short time after that spill, people were selling, seafood from the Gulf. And they were literally telling people, just smell your seafood to see if it's safe.
Yeah.
That's just, it's, the stupidity.
Right.
Is, and I don't know which is worse, the fact that they put that out or the fact that people say, oh, okay, well, that makes sense.
Right. Well, they're so dumbed down. That's the problem. The masses are so dumbed down.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I mean, just for you to put out the material you put out on so many different levels, I mean, that's like huge for them to try to even comprehend that there's something like that exists, or the possibility, because they're so dumbed down by television and now it's the genetically modified foods. I could go on about all this stuff, but yeah, it's really unfortunate. But I think there's a reason that people are seeing things now and feeling things, and a lot of the interdimensional energies you're talking about, ominous presence here and there. I'm not going to go into a big tale about something, but I got in a really bad car accident, head-on collision. This was another head-on collision. I actually had a drunk driver hit me, but I had an omen before that accident, and I actually saw a man in the middle of the road with a baseball bat. It was a spirit, and he was warning me. And I know that's what happened. It was right before my accident. So it's kind of like, you can cast this stuff out, folks, but I'll tell you what, they do show up, and there's a reason for it. So I think people need to pay more attention to what's really happening, not only energetically, but also what's going on with these governments and these cabals and the things they're doing to this environment that's damaging our futures, your children's future. Good luck if you have grandchildren. Seriously, if we don't turn it around.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, even if we do start working really hard to turn it around, we're still going to experience some negativity, unfortunately, because this is, the so-called powers that be, they're not just going to say, oh, okay, well, you can change whatever you want to, we'll stop. It's not going to happen. They're not going to give up control easily, and they've taken it over a long course of time. It's been a long period that these things have been developing, and they just get away with an increasing amount of this kind of thing each year because they have people more and more distracted. And it's incredible. I'll never forget a couple of years ago, sitting down with a group of people, and these were like-minded people, and some of them were very, sort of right there on the edge where they wanted to learn more about, alternative things, and literally, after dinner, everyone is sitting around talking about these different topics, and this couple says, "Oh, my gosh, it's almost 9, we've got to go," and they rush out like they have an appointment, and everybody's like, it was in the middle of a serious discussion. Like, oh, is that everything okay? Oh, yeah, well, the Dancing with the Stars finale is on tonight. And I'm thinking, oh, my God, this is such a statement. And if you enjoy that kind of stuff, okay, that's fine. But look, educate yourself and be aware, turn off freaking CNN because they're not going to tell you any real news. They're programmed, and they're going to tell you what they're allowed to tell you, and start looking at alternative sources because there are plenty out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, once you see the false matrix and you see how it's been a big, sideshow of illusion, it becomes more disgusting. I mean, I was thinking about that today. The more I see the truth and the deception and the lies and the censorship that have been happening forever, the more I realize, like, wow, man, I'm just almost bummed out that I'm on the planet, because it's like,
Yeah.
we have been lied to for so long. I mean, about everything. You name it. It's been horrible. The Black Space Program, UFO disclosure, you name it. Covert technology. I can go on and on about how people have been deceived, and it's been right under their noses and hidden in plain sight. So, yeah, It's just really amazing how that's gone on. But it's very unfortunate. But I didn't want to take you off the topic, but this is part of the topic, actually, when I think about it.
It is all part of it, because, there are there's a massive increase in numbers of UFO sightings, encounters with various kinds of entities. The reports of the weird are just growing at an alarming rate, and for me, it's kind of a two-way story, because on the one hand, I'm sitting around thinking, oh, this is great, there's more stuff to look at and investigate and pursue and everything else. But on the other hand, it's sort of setting off those red flags, in that it's saying, wow, the gates are really starting to burst open, and people better start paying attention, because there's a lot more going on here than the average person realizes or accepts. And I think that on a deeper level, shamanically speaking, from a lot of the cultures that I studied with, I know a lot of this has to do with the time period that we're entering into. 2012 was a big, media deal, but the reality is that we are entering a phase where this planet is expanding and the consciousness is opening up, whether people want it to or not.
Absolutely. Okay, we're heading for a break here, David. We'll be right back on Ravenstar's Witching Hour with David Weatherly. Stay tuned, everybody.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Intuitive improvisation is the secret of genius.
I want to break free.
Oh, I see.
I put my pants on,
So,
just like the rest of you, one leg at a time.
I guess I'll have to watch.
Guess what? I got a fever, and the only prescription is more vodka.
I turn cities into salt.
Oh, okay.
You gotta come work for me.
Right.
I could get you in now. You love it. Nobody tells you when to go to bed.
If you want to call in, sure.
All day, all night.
If you want to fight or you got something more important,
You eat all the ice cream you want.
I'll take that too.
You're talking to me all wrong. It's the wrong tone.
I know all these people. I don't know all these people.
Is there anybody out there?
So, oh, I see. Right. Yeah, I'm challenged.
Changing reality
Where life is beautiful.
with the hijacker. Monday through Thursday at midnight. Be there. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Imagine no longer being tied down to your computer, but having the freedom to take live talk radio with you anywhere you go. TalkStream Live introduces our first ever iPhone application. The talk shows you follow now follow you, and your iPhone is now the fastest and easiest way to stay connected to the best talk radio on the internet. Let TalkStream Live transform the way you listen to radio. Listen to live talk shows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mobile talk radio from TalkStream Live. Now available in the iTunes App Store.
How dare you, sir?
How dare you?
No, how dare you?
No, how dare you?
How dare you? No, Mike, how dare you?
You dare to dare me?
How dare you? How dare me when I how dare you? You big sleepy head.
Hello all, thanks for tuning in to Revolution Radio. We are the #1 public access commercial-free internet talk radio station on the web with between 12 and 16 hours of live programming per day, bringing you news, politics, entertainment, and just plain human interactive talks with our extremely informative and successful nightly open caller roundtables. And how do we do this? Through the support of volunteers and donations from good listeners like you. So if you're digging what you hear and we are bringing you an entertaining and informative service, please visit our site support page and donate to the cause. Keep us live, keep us kicking, help us bring you the talk. We are already here. Help keep us here. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Revolution Radio!
How the pressure have to get naked! I can't get it! I can't do it!
Imagine no longer being tied down to your computer, but having the freedom to take live talk radio with you anywhere you go. TalkStream Live introduces our first ever iPhone application. The talk shows you follow now follow you, and your iPhone is now the fastest and easiest way to stay connected to the best talk radio on the internet. Let TalkStream Live transform the way you listen to radio. Listen to live talk shows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mobile talk radio from TalkStream Live. Now available in the iTunes App Store.
Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven here. And if you'd like to call in, the number is 347-688-2902 or Freedom Screen on Skype. I'm talking with David Weatherly. We're discussing the black-eyed children. And David, have these children affected animals in any way? Do you have any record of that?
Oh, there's a couple of very interesting stories with animals involved. The one that is very fascinating occurred in the Dallas, Texas metro area. And this is a gentleman who came home from the grocery store. He walked up to his door. He had a couple of bags in his hand. And, you know, his yard is very open. There's not really anything out there. He has a small set of steps that go up to his door. And just as he reached up to open the door, he suddenly realizes that there's this young boy standing on the ground by the steps. And, you know, that in itself was a bit startling because, you know, the kid wasn't there when he walked up to the steps. He turns and looks at this boy, and this boy says to him, "Is it food time?" Now, obviously no one talks like that. You know, it's very creepy and unnerving to this guy, and he's not really responding. He's just looking at this boy, and you know, this kid has repeated this phrase. You know, "I think it's food time. You should invite me in." And this gentleman, he had opened the front door, and it had sort of swung open. And as he's trying to puzzle this out, looking at this creepy kid, he hears his 3-year-old pit bull at the back of the house barking. And this gentleman has solid wood floors in his home. His front door opens into a hallway that runs straight back to the living room. And he hears his pit bull getting closer. He glances very quickly in, and sees the pit bull turn the corner, charging down the hallway at a full run. And right before it gets to the front door, this dog tries to put the brakes on. And it's almost comical when you think about it, because it's sort of the Scooby-Doo thing, you know, this dog is sliding on this hard wood, literally tumbles out over itself onto the front steps, jumps up as quickly as it charged out, but now it's tail is between its legs, its head is down, it's whining, and it's running back in the home as quickly as it can. Now, this really pushed this guy over the edge. He ran inside behind the dog, he slammed the door, and he goes to another part of the house and looks out the window to see if this black-eyed kid is still there, and the kid has vanished at this point. But the dog was really affected. It had run back to the master bedroom. It was hiding under the bed. It wouldn't come out for the longest period of time. When he was finally able to get the dog to go outside, he had to take it out the back door and stay with it. This dog had completely changed its personality. He had raised this dog from the time it was a pup. He had trained it as a guard dog. He had watched this dog kill rattlesnakes and never back down from anything. And all of a sudden, just being in the proximity of this kid, this dog has become, a complete wuss, and was just terrified of everything since then. And he said the dog has never been the same since then.
Wow. Now, that's a bad omen right there when animals are so psychic anyways. So that would kind of give you some
Absolutely.
insight.
And there's not a lot of accounts either of these kids showing up in the presence of animals. That's certainly by far the most impressive one. There are a couple others that I've received, of cats being nearby and just running away into the home and hiding, and there's a couple of similar things, but that is the most extensive encounter with an animal present.
And do they show up in groups, or is it just usually one?
No, they do. They do sometimes show up in pairs. There's a couple of reports where there are 3 of them at a time. So it's again, it seems to be that there's a variation. There are also girls that show up sometimes with solid black eyes. Sometimes it'll be a pair, a boy and a girl. Sometimes it's 2 boys.
Wow.
This is again not a continuous pattern to the beings themselves.
Right. That's really interesting. I mean, I find it very, very fascinating and creepy at the same time. But I was going to ask you about your strange intruders. Let's talk about that a little bit. What does that entail, and how'd you get involved with that one?
Strange Intruders is a book that covers sort of a range of different entity encounters. This book just came out literally a couple of weeks ago, and it does have some black-eyed kid and some black-eyed adult encounters in it. I'm constantly asked if there are accounts of black-eyed adults, and the answer is yes, there are. So I put a chapter on them in this new book, but it covers a wide range of essentially entity encounters. And there's a chapter on the jinn, for instance. Tried to address some things that, over the last few years, there's a handful of things that I'm consistently asked about. And I decided to put some of that material out and sort of give people, hopefully, some answers or some inspiration to, research more themselves. And the 3 things that really stood out were, again, black-eyed adults. I get a lot of questions on the jinn, and I have had a ton of questions on Slender Man. So there's a chapter on Slender Man.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. What's Slender Man? Sounds like a superhero.
Well, it's not. Slender Man is essentially an internet creation. What happened? The background, the short version of the background story on Slender Man is that there was a forum called Something Awful, and someone decided to start a contest where they would have people present paranormal themed photographs, fake photographs. And the idea essentially was to create a sort of meme that went viral on the internet. And, convinced people essentially that this is real. And, when the contest started, a whole range of people were posting, monster pics and ghost, fake ghost photographs and all kinds of things. But this fellow posted a brief story and a photograph on something he called Slender Man. And the Slender Man was a being who essentially had no real discernible face. He was extremely tall, had long arms. Some people, said that he had multiple arms, and he showed up at strange situations where there were, fires or disappearances and so forth. And this thing really caught the attention of the people on the forum. People started contributing to it, became very interactive. They started to embed Slender Man in older things historically and say, oh, he's linked to an ancient German legend, and this thing really grew at a ridiculous rate. Now, what's fascinating about it is that although we have a very clearly defined beginning point for this so-called entity, it didn't stop people from believing in it. Coast to Coast AM one night, started receiving frantic calls from people who were convinced that they had encountered Slender Man. People, started to report essentially beings that sounded like Slender Man, plaguing their dreams or memories from childhood and so forth. And it appears to me that this thing has become so embedded in a lot of people's psyche that they are perhaps they're encountering something else and they're interpreting it as Slender Man, or they could even be creating essentially a tulpa. They could. I think that some of these people are co-creating their experience of seeing this creature, and you have to realize that if you're going to put that much thought and energy into something, that it's possible to manifest it into being or to manifest an experience with it. And people always say, I've had several people ask me, well, what's the difference between that and for instance, Freddy Krueger in the movies or something? And the difference is that this was put out and promoted in a way that really blurred the lines between reality and, hey, this is a hoax, we're having fun. When you go to a movie that is something like, the Freddy Krueger movies, you're going to see this thing that Hollywood has created, and it's a big, setup to let's go be scared and creeped out for 2 hours or whatever. But this Slender Man thing, it's really interesting because the person who created it took such a subtle approach. It made it all the creepier, and it really embedded it into a lot of people's consciousness. And this thing it really went viral over a period of time, and a video series was started up that really hyped the energy of it and increased the creepy factor of this so-called Slender Man. And like a lot of people are very aggravated about it. I had someone tell me, it's got no place in the book on the paranormal. Well, I beg to differ because, like it or not, it's become embedded in the paranormal in a very indirect fashion. And, we have to understand how this whole mythos around this figure has come to be.
Yeah. Well, and then you get back to the thoughts and the manifestation. I mean, we do create our own reality. Everybody knows it. So you have to be very careful insofar as what you're harnessing energetically. And that also parallels with the fear. I mean, if you're generating a lot of fear, then you're going to create a lot of different false realities, connected to the lower astral plane, or what I would suspect would be lower astral. So very interesting indeed.
Well, I absolutely agree with you, except for the idea that everybody knows it, because unfortunately I think that most people don't.
Right.
You really have to sort of shift your consciousness to the realization that what you're focusing on, you're manifesting in your life on a daily basis. So, it's like sometimes you just have these eye-opening moments, and I can remember a lot of years ago in the early 90s, I lived in Washington, D.C., and, I can remember seeing people who literally just day after day, they were rushing through their lives. You'd see a guy running in the mornings to hit that metro train because he couldn't wait, the minute and a half for the next one to come through. And you'd see the same guy rushing off it at night, and this is the same guy who's complaining that his job is killing him. And if you affirm that every day, then, yeah, your job's going to kill you. Make yourself sick or give yourself ulcers or whatever. And, our existence on this planet is one of a co-creative nature. And the quicker we wake up to that, the better we'll be able to make things.
I totally agree. And I think a lot of it's beyond religion. I mean, spirituality is really focusing on higher levels of consciousness where everything's more on an unconditional love consciousness level. I think people really need to start transcending their own consciousness. And I think that's part of the problem we're having on this planet. It's my take anyway. People are disconnected from source. I mean, there's no connection to the universe or to that beautiful celestial energy. So they're becoming so disembodied. They're almost like disembodied spirits at this point. Some of them. That's
true, and it's interesting, because I have friends from a wide range of spiritual and religious traditions, and the ones that are really in touch with what they're practicing are the ones that really, go to the source, however they perceive it or believe in it. And I think that over the years, in general, religious traditions spend a lot of time and energy focusing on the idea that you could not have that direct connection. And it's kind of ironic because even, for instance, the Christian tradition, will honor, saints and monks and so forth who had a very profound experience in direct, contact with spirit. But at the same time, they discourage that in people because they present this idea that, no, you need to listen to the minister or you need to go to the priest to, take away your, absolve you of your sins and all these different barriers that are put in between people and their natural connection to God, however you wish to perceive that.
Totally true. Yeah, there's no middleman. I always tell people that. It's you, your higher self, your oversoul, superconscious, and source. I mean, however you want to define it, but that's the divinity within. That's a gift we've been given on this earth, and I wish people would access more of it, each person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's no middleman. There's just fellow travelers on the path.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you see all the people that are disconnected from source, and I've been on the path trying to awaken people for a very long time, and it's just like, it just falls on deaf ears sometimes. But then there are beings like us. I mean, we're out there doing whatever it is we're here to do, but it's nice that you're on this timeline anyway. I'm very appreciative of that. It's really, really good. What sacred sites or investigation calls you the most on this world? I mean, you've been around a lot. What place really pulls you? I was just curious insofar as energetics or anything call to you?
On a personal level, Europe in general, particularly all the lands that were Celtic originally. So Ireland, Scotland, Wales. I just that's sort of home for me, I guess you would say. But a wide variety. I mean, I've traveled extensively. I've been blessed with being able to do that. I've spent a lot of time with Native Americans, particularly in the Southwest, and it's funny because I live in the Southwest now, and if I went and lived somewhere else, I know I would miss it, but it kind of gets in your blood. The desert does. But yeah, there have been some other sites too. I just got back in June. I was in Chile for a while, and I spent just over a week on Easter Island. Nice. And that was a phenomenal experience. That was sort of on my list of places to get to, at some point. And it did not disappoint at all. And it's funny because when I travel somewhere, I typically don't go as a tourist. I think that's just one, obnoxious, and two, it's not what I'm there for. So it was very amusing because I heard other people who've been there and they say, "Oh, you only need 2 days. You've seen everything, and then you can go back." And I was like, "Okay, I probably need at least a week."
Yeah.
So I just go and settle in with some of the locals and sort of jack into the vibe of the energy that's there, and it's pretty amazing. It's a very sacred place. There's such an air of mystery around the Moai, even today, and even archaeologists and people who've studied the site, they don't really have solid answers. They really don't. They're just not sure, and to me, a lot of them are not convincing as to why those things were built. the other thing you don't hear about without going there is that, different sets of those moai have very unique energies and very, very different feelings depending on where you are on the island.
Right.
So that was a pretty fascinating thing.
Would you say their energetic is frightening to some people, or is it more calming or protective? I mean, what was the signature?
The island itself.
Or of the statues?
Oh, the statues.
Yeah.
Well, it depended on which set you were around. There was one set that was in a beautiful location right on the water, and they have a really uneasy vibe. It's there's sort of this sense of darkness around why they're there or what they were built for, but others feel incredibly, strong and protective, and you just get this sense of calmness and, that idea that nothing could faze you or affect you there around those particular moai.
It's really interesting. I have a friend who's terrified of those statues for some reason. And I don't know if it was a past life thing she's tuned into or what, but she's really...
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, every time she sees any pictures of them, she just gets really fear-based. And I find it interesting, but, I'm sure you're familiar with the night marchers on the islands.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, to me, I felt very protected by them energetically. When I was up on Maui at Eel Valley, I felt very shielded by them, and I had a lot of interaction with them. Now, a lot of people will say opposite, so... I guess it depends on your consciousness and where you're at on your spiritual path also, would you say?
Absolutely, it does. And it also depends on, how you approach them. If you were approaching them with respect and in the right manner, then, it's going to be reciprocated. But, if you go with the idea of fear or, the sense that this is something evil or sinister, then you're going to get the same energy reflected back at you, I think. And the night marchers in particular, I know that a lot of people that have had negative experiences with them were either non-native people or people who were just very disrespectful of the whole concept and thought it was silly superstition or folklore or whatever. But we always have to pay attention because there's so much rooted in folklore and legends that, eventually are reflected in our modern reality. I think that it's fortunately, we're at a point now where the quantum sciences, there's always been such a division between science and spirituality or science and religion. And I think that science, it was only able to get so far before it had to start broadening its approach and its sense of interacting with things. And a lot of these quantum scientists, I've spoken to a lot of these guys, and it's amazing. And they wouldn't step foot in a church, but they have such spiritual concepts. It's mind-boggling. The way they approach some of these ideas, and it's just that they have this burning desire to quote prove it somehow. But at the same time, a lot of the quantum sciences are all theories and strings of things written on board. So it's fascinating to see some of that stuff, quote, proven by science that, again, native cultures have talked about for the ages.
Isn't that funny? I agree with that, too. I mean, we've been talking about DNA activation, and this isn't New Age, by the way. I mean, anything with higher consciousness and quantum consciousness. I mean, we've talked about this for decades and centuries, and now all of a sudden it's like mainstream science is trying to say they've discovered something new. Well, we knew about the 0 point in consciousness energy. I mean, that alone. That's huge. I mean, and consciousness is the key to our evolution, and we know that, we as spiritual beings, but they don't even have a clue. I mean, they don't understand the concept of consciousness and how powerful it is and how it converts everything and how we can navigate to any universe or star system using consciousness. So, they're trying to catch up, but then we have the black space programs that are already, leapfrogging around, which is kind of interesting. Sure. But
well, and then you have, the human energy field.
Right.
Which, it really amused me back in the mid-90s or something. I remember Greg Braden, Greg was running around talking about some of this stuff and announcing this whole scientific study that, science, has come out and proved there's a human energy field. And, it was so laughable because it's like, wow, what do you think cultures around the world have talked about for the, for thousands of years. Chi, mana, prana, all these different terms. That's exactly what they're talking about. Yeah, there's a human energy field that the body puts off, and yes, you can utilize it and work with it. And that's it's just amusing that they make this grand announcement like, oh, okay, it's okay to believe in this now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, when Dr. God says it's okay, right? I don't think so, but that's how they operate. But we are multidimensional beings, and once people start to get that we are multidimensional, and we're very powerful beings, I think that they would understand a lot more, for certain. But you said you did.
Maybe they would stop listening to the government as much.
Oh, absolutely. Well, they're so conditioned. I mean, they're very conditioned right now to. It's just really sad to watch. I don't know. I don't have it in my blood to be like that. I'm really glad I'm not like that. But I see a lot of people, boy, they just really just surrender right into the illusion like it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. And when you have people trying to shut down your consciousness or your spiritual evolution, then that's something that people need to pay attention to, because that's what drives us as a civilization.
Sure is.
Yeah, it's just wild. But I was going to ask you about your Native American adventures, and what is your take on the Skinwalker?
Oh, well, the Skinwalker, for anybody who doesn't know, the term comes from the Dene or the Navajo, and it is a being that essentially it's a witch. Now, when you use the term witch with southwestern tribes, you have to set aside the European concept. We're not talking about a European witch. We're not talking about the idea of the Salem witches or modern Wicca or witchcraft or any of those things. In their belief system, a witch is a person who is essentially evil and works with a dark form of magic. The concept of the Skinwalker is that these people can essentially kill another being and literally steal its skin. And by doing that, they are able to shapeshift into an animal or another person. It's an interesting world when you start delving into those things. For one thing, you cannot approach a Navajo person and say, "Hey, what can you tell me about skinwalkers or witchcraft?" They will ignore you. They will walk away. It is taboo to even discuss those things because, much like you and I were talking about earlier, there's this concept among those people that if you talk about that and focus on it, it will summon it to you.
Mm-hmm, right. Yeah.
It will lead to an experience with one of these things, and you will attract its attention. So it's something that has to be researched very delicately and very carefully, and over time you can learn ways to sort of talk around the topic and get information. These stories go back hundreds and hundreds of years, well before the white man was here. And, I think there's a lot of validity to them. What they are literally doing, I'm not exactly sure, but, there are some pretty weird accounts out there of people witnessing very strange things. And I can tell you, driving across the Navajo Reservation, which is a huge, expansive land, drive across that res late at night, and you will see some very strange things. I think that there are certainly some people out in those hills that work with some darker energies, and they can pull off some pretty disturbing things. Right.
Yeah. I've heard of the old Native American curses, but it's interesting. I had someone tell me a long time ago I had immunity to skinwalkers, and wasn't really sure what that meant, but maybe it'll come in handy someday.
Couldn't hurt, right?
Yeah, right. Maybe it's an antidote of some kind, but I don't know. I've been through a lot of hells, so maybe that's part of it, but it's very interesting. I was going to ask you, are you planning on doing any type of screenplay or film for your books?
I've been asked about that. There's nothing solid in the works yet, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I've been approached by a lot of Hollywood types, and I'm usually very cautious with them. I turned down a number of the television shows just because I don't like their approach or like what they're doing, and I can tell you I've got friends on a lot of the paranormal theme shows, but it would have to be the right one for me to do some work with them. But I'm certainly not opposed to it.
Yeah, well, good for you on that, because I do think Hollywood has a tendency to poison things. But the Black-Eyed Children, boy, that would make a really good film of some kind. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So I was going to ask you just a little bit about your martial arts. I was just very curious. So you want to give us a rundown insofar as how you got involved in that? And
I started studying martial arts when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I guess because I was interested in unusual things in general, I was not interested in any of the standard, football or baseball or any of those types of things. And I got interested in martial arts and started studying with a teacher I found who taught karate. And, I went through that for quite a few years and reached a black belt in Japanese style of karate. And then sort of left it for a while because I was traveling a lot and doing other things. And eventually came back around to it and started training some Filipino martial arts and sword work. And
nice.
Then I went and studied. I decided I've always sort of followed, my guidance and studied with the teachers that I knew I needed to train with. And I'd always been very intrigued from the time I was a kid with ninjutsu, because I guess maybe it's the most mystical of all the martial arts, and certainly
Right.
If you look at all the legends and everything surrounding the ninja in Japan. And so I sought out the premier teacher of ninjutsu in the United States, and that was Stephen K. Hayes, a gentleman who had literally went to Japan and found the last ninja master and trained under him and brought the art back to the United States. And I trained under Mr. Hayes for my entire time in that art and achieved black belt and taught for a while at his Hambu dojo. And it's just it's pretty amazing art. It has like a lot of the arts, it has a hidden side, and there are different aspects that you can pursue if you choose to, and sort of unlock some of the keys that brought you to the art on a personal level. And that's what it did for me.
Oh, yeah, I love it, too. I totally resonate with that. It definitely gives you a lot of mental discipline, in my opinion. I think everybody should go through some kind of martial arts training. It's really just such a benefit on so many different levels.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it helps, with... I've seen so many people, that I was... that came through the dojo, over the years, young people that needed that focus, or they needed some confidence, or whatever it was. And it's wonderful to see people get that from the arts.
I totally agree, and it seems like they're trying to disempower the masses instead of empower the masses, So, but I'd like to see people in law enforcement have to go through that and to get a black belt, because that would teach mental discipline. And I've said this before, if I were running those departments, I would make it mandatory for them to get a black belt. And if they can't do it, then they're out, because they have to have the mental discipline and control, not to just go crazy, literally be able to counterattack something with control and discipline, So I'd like to see more people centered on that level. Yeah.
That's true. And it's interesting, because going through those arts, a lot of people think that you do it so you can learn to fight, but ultimately you do it so you don't have to fight.
Absolutely. That's the whole thing about a black belt, It's really interesting. But that's when I think it's like so many people just get guns, and these people in these divisions have all these nice cutesy weapons, but they don't have the mental discipline to use them. I mean, they're just crazy. They're just going ballistic on anyone and anything without any respect to the person. So, I mean, that's total abuse of power, and that's something we don't teach in martial arts. I mean, it's you use it when you need to, and only if it's life-threatening. So
yeah, and what you're talking about is a complex problem too, because what we've seen over the years is a lot of veterans come back from the Gulf War and go straight into law enforcement, and some of these people are and don't get me wrong, I've got some friends in law enforcement that are incredibly wonderful people, but even they are concerned at some of the things that are happening, and you cannot deny the number of reports that are showing up on a weekly basis of someone being tased to death, or beaten senseless by a law enforcement officer because the guy was taking a picture of the cop and things like this. And it's
Yeah, we're
Wow,
kind of losing it.
it's all part of the crazy transition that we're going through.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of negativity associated with that field anyways, but the fact of the matter is they're not shielding themselves enough to protect themselves psychologically from the
Right.
impact. So, I mean, I've met some good law enforcement too as well, and I've worked around them with surveillance that I've done. So, yeah, I've seen the good and the bad, but I get very, very concerned when I see the misuse and abuse of power, not only with the law enforcement, but with every other division. You know, I can go right down the list of every division and department that's abusing the privilege of having access to a weapons system that could really just destroy everyone. So.
Yeah, but we have to realize that all is sourced at the top. It starts in Washington because, you know, over the years, and I don't care about Republicans or Democrats or whatever. They're two sides of the same coin. And, you know, the quicker that people wake up to that reality, the quicker they can start to think in a clear-headed fashion. Because, you know, the reality is that there's really no difference between Bush and Obama. It's just a continuation of the same track that we were on. And, you know, it's going to continue on the same track until people say enough is enough. The revelations that have come forward, you know, with each of these administrations, I mean, you know, look at the last 6 months. You know, we've had, my gosh, Benghazi, the IRS scandal, you know, the revelations about the NSA spying on American citizens. You know, it's scandal after scandal, and people... They just, it gets whitewashed, you know, it gets swept under the rug. The mainstream media is not going to talk about it. And, you know, people think, oh, it's okay.
I know.
It's all for our own good, you know, it's for our safety. It's like the people that think it's great to go through these body scanners at airports. Oh, yeah, it's no problem.
Yeah, exactly. They keep complying and complying. You know, you give them an inch, they take a mile. You know, that's
right.
pretty much what's happened. It's totally out of control. But, yeah, I'm wondering to what degree society is going to suffer in the United States until this changes, you know, how much bloodshed, how many people have to die, and just to stand up for something that's a given to us, you know, naturally, our freedoms. You know, it really is a given. I mean, people can say, you know, you don't have to earn freedom. It's literally a given, even being on this planet, whether people want to acknowledge that or not. But I find it very concerning. And I don't want to see this goose stepping across the globe. I just, it's got to stop. All this evil has to stop, you know. It's just terrible.
Yeah, and it's certainly steamrolling through the country right now.
Oh gosh, it's horrible. I mean, we hate to get on that topic because we both, you know, it's like I go on and on about it. But you know, I can't not think about it. I'm not obsessed with it, but I'm very aware that I'm in a danger zone, and not just me, everybody, that we're in a danger zone in the United States right now. It's very critical that we start shifting gears and changing this and turning it around. And if people just keep losing it or they just ignore the situation, it's not going to go away and it's not going to get any better. So it has me very concerned.
That's right.
They want to turn on their televisions and they want to just eat their genetically modified foods, and that's zero nutrient. They're not getting any. I can't figure that out. You know, you might as well just not eat anything if you're going to have GMOs. It's crazy.
Well, it's genetically modified and then it's microwaved. So
yeah, really, it's like,
you make sure that every bit of nutrition is out of it.
It's really just sabotage. I've seen global sabotage galore is really what it looks like, you know, from everything. That's what's gotten me. So far as just paying attention and knowing that we're in a situation that feels really, really bad, and hopefully we'll get out of it okay. But I think that staying closer to the universal energies and spirituality and whatever it is you do to keep yourself connected to Source on a spiritual level will really help shift it. That's my opinion anyway. But still, you need a lot of people shifting gears onto that level, you know, synchronizing, and they're not really doing that.
You do, and it's funny because it's a fine line to walk. It really is. You know, like we were talking about earlier, you have to be careful about focusing on negativity because you will draw it towards you, and that's true. You know, the person who drives constantly thinking about a cop pulling them over, they're probably going to get pulled over by a cop. Yep. You know, so you know, it's, as I said, it's a real fine line to walk in that you can't stick your head in the sand and just ignore that these things are going on. You have to be informed to some level because, you know, you need to take into account your personal safety, your family safety, and so forth. And, you know, a lot of people right now, the last couple of years, a lot of people are being called to relocate, you know, whether it's somewhere different in the United States or whether it's to a different country altogether. I'm seeing more and more of that. And that's something that I was taught years ago, I can remember from some of my native teachers, back in the 80s and 90s, several of them consistently said that, look, there's going to be a time when a lot of people are going to start being called to go live in other places, and that's part of the changes that are happening on the planet. It's funny, you were talking about signs earlier, and it really is true. There literally are signs everywhere. You just have to pay attention in your personal life, and whether you need to pray or meditate or whatever you need to do on a spiritual level to stay connected and stay protected from that negativity while being aware that these things are going on. That's the fine line you have to walk, and that will lead you to points of understanding where you will be guided to where you need to be and what you need to do, and nothing's impossible. If you're being called to go somewhere and it seems on the surface, oh, there's no way I could do that, it's impossible. No, don't say that. Pay attention and follow the signs, and Spirit will help co-create it with you if you really want to be on path. I
totally agree with that. Yeah, paying attention, it brings more clarity anyways when you connect with that higher self, oversoul. I call
Absolutely.
it the superconscious mind. I mean, to me, it's like that's where I get my clarity. If you get wrapped up in the emotional body or the mental body spinning too fast, I mean, it's just chaos in motion. So you have to kind of let go of the wheel. And a lot of people can't do that. I mean, I'm a control freak too, but at the same time, I know when to surrender to the universe. I know when to let go of the wheel in situations. And some people don't. They just they're stuck in the survival mode, but what they don't realize is that they can't survive in these conditions. We're going to have to change them before they can have a better life. I don't think they're seeing that just yet.
Well, and what's happening now is that the amount of fear that continues to circulate, it really has people living in states of denial on a lot of levels.
Right.
And, the controlling powers are more than happy to put the blood and circuses out there for you to pay attention to. Whatever the public fascination is at the moment, whether it's, American Idol or whether it's, whatever. It's amazing to me to see how obsessed people will become on really nonsense. And there's nothing wrong with being entertained. Don't get me wrong. I'll sit down and I'll watch stuff on television. I'll read fiction. I'll do things like that to give myself a break. But at the same time, you cannot become obsessed with Miley Cyrus's next haircut or what's happened to Britney Spears, or Justin Bieber. I mean, it's just it's crazy that people will build their lives around these things, and they'll ignore what's going on that is of great importance that we really should be paying attention to either help change or direct or whatever needs to be done.
Right. Yeah, it's a deliberate distraction. Shame on these mainstream media. I have no respect for anybody who works for mainstream media just because they deliberately distract the masses. I find that people that have gone out of their way to basically disempower, distract, censor, or just lie, I just find them, I just loathe them, honestly. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's really just inexcusable, honestly. On this timeline where lives are important and people's realities are important, you can't be feeding them crap, So it's really
that's right.
A shame that it's happening, and it's a shame that it's gotten out of control, and it's a shame that...
And even...
Go ahead. David, go ahead.
No, even these alternative topics, I've noticed that there are so many people starting to pay attention to them that the new tactic is... okay, let's make them entertainment and let's make fun of them. There was a program, a lot of people have been talking about this Joe Rogan guy. And I don't know if you're familiar with this or not. They've run, I don't know, a handful of episodes, I guess. These people called me. I talked to them on the phone, and it was one of the things that I essentially said, no, okay, no thanks. Joe Rogan is some mixed martial arts guy who, suddenly decided that he needs to make a show about alternative topics, and he did a whole episode on chemtrails. And sitting and watching this thing was just appalling because the whole thing was a big joke. It was really designed to make people that thought essentially, if you watch that show, it's saying, oh, if you believe that there's anything going on with chemtrailing, you're an idiot, or you're not cool. They really portray this way.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that going on. I agree. I haven't seen that particular show, but I wouldn't be surprised. Well, just like they like to make fun of a lot of other things that are happening. And I know a lot about covert technology that I've exposed in the past, and I have the facts about it on a scientific level and how it affects the spiritual design. So people would poo-poo that too, but that's due to disinformation and just spreading the disinformation. I was going to ask you, I heard this really weird noise coming. I suspect it's something connected to your computer, but...
I don't think so, because I've heard it on this end, too.
So we've been getting that, and I haven't said anything, but it really escalated while you were talking, and I thought, well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But I noticed it as soon as you started, as soon as we started the interview, so I didn't say anything. I'm like, all right, well, we'll write it out, but that's quite interesting. Yeah, I'm not going to have any visitors tonight, right?
Don't answer the door.
I won't be answering the door for sure. Oh, I have enough stuff to deal with. Don't need those kids. Oh, my goodness. Maybe I can do some kind of a ritual to clear them out and ascend their consciousness or something. I wonder if people have tried that.
It's funny kind of coming around full circle to the black-eyed kids. If there is anything at all remotely positive about these experiences, it is this. A large portion of the people who encounter these kids, in the aftermath, they turn to a spiritual path. Now, there's no pattern in that. Sometimes it is the tradition they grew up in. Sometimes it is something completely opposite. Someone who grew up Jewish may have the experience and become Buddhist in the aftermath. People will go to the Catholic Church, or they will, turn to an earth religion like Wicca, or it's been a wide range of it. But what I consistently hear from these people is that they have chosen to do that because they want something that gives them protection and helps ensure that these kids will not return.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
It's a very fascinating after effect that occurs in the aftermath of these sightings, because essentially, the people who deal with these kids, they end up like trauma victims. When they're talking about their experiences and relating what's happened, they will talk about disrupted sleep patterns, paranoia, outright periods of fear and just a lot of strange after effects. It's very common for people to have dreams about the black-eyed children for sometimes long periods after their encounter. And, you sit down and talk to these people, and they come off like trauma victims. And what happens is, at some point, very often, these people will decide to seek out something spiritual. They might pick up a Bible and start reading it. They might start, they might pursue something, but
right.
It's maybe the one positive benefit to these experiences.
Right. I think it's an omen of things to come on some level. I mean, considering what we were talking about with the planet and how evil it's become with people's personalities in general, I mean, maybe it is an omen for these people to turn their lives around and go to a higher level of spirituality and find protection and shield themselves and be aware and stay fortified in light consciousness. So it does make sense to me, for certain.
Yeah, it does. And most of these people... when you sit down and talk with them, you'll find out that they were not really spiritual before they had the encounter, and then some of them will identify themselves within a particular tradition, but when pressed on it, they will say, well, no, I don't really go to church. I'm a Christian, but I don't go to church. Okay, well, what does that mean exactly? Were you raised Christian? Well, I was raised this or that, and it's interesting. These are people who are not actively practicing any kind of spiritual path for the most part. Maybe a small handful of them, over all the cases. But they are, for the most part, people who are just very career focused, focused on their work and maybe their family, and that's it. Interesting enough, the greater portion of them are not people who have any interest in the paranormal prior to the experience. So they're not sitting around watching, ghost shows or anything else.
Right.
Another one exception to that is that there's sort of a subset of people who have these encounters who are also abductees. And that subset of people, they're people who believe that they've been abducted and used in some type of hybrid breeding program. And so, I get reports from people who are absolutely positive that they have seen a black-eyed child who was actually their child.
Wow.
That was the result of genetic experimentation. So, this may be a case where we're looking at a couple of different phenomena. It's again, the whole abduction phenomena. A lot of people, sort of poke fun at it and say, "Oh, yeah, a lot of people were just sexual fantasies or whatever." No, I don't think so. There's far too many people for this to be, hoaxing or just people telling tales. A lot of these people have very disturbed and disrupted lives in the aftermath of their experiences. They're not doing it for a kick.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, the MyLabs are for real, whether people want to acknowledge that or not. And what happens when they get psychologically messed with, all sorts of realities start, kind of merging together. And there's a lot of strange things that start to happen with the psyche. So it's just like a time traveler beyond time. I mean, you have to be really fortified in your mind to travel beyond the dimensions you're at. And if you can't handle that ride, then it's going to fracture you or fragment some of the,
absolutely.
energy field. So I see it like that also. But yeah, it makes me kind of sad to think that there's this kind of misery floating around on these dimensions, and this ominous, evil sadness. It's just very, very shameful for me to see this and observe it. I mean, I don't know. I feel bad for everybody, but it's just there's something about it that I find sad. It's the only word that comes to mind.
Well, I try to look at the positive side of this and say that, ancient cultures have talked about this point that we're in for a long time. And, this is sort of a confluence of a lot of negative influences and energies. And, it's like a Chinese curse. You live in interesting times. Wow, you and I certainly picked it, didn't we?
I'm telling you.
This is kind of it.
Totally.
I think there are just so many diverse streams of energy that are colliding essentially right now. Yeah. And, some people are going to flow into it, and some people are going to go kicking and screaming. But regardless of your approach, this world is changing very radically, and that's going to continue to happen for the next few years.
Right.
So, all of this is sort of coalescing into one massive upheaval in a sense. And, it's funny because you go into the metaphysical arena and there's a lot of people who are fascinated with the idea of the earth changes, the prophecies of Edgar Casey and, various other prophets who talk about these massive upheavals and changes. And everybody, it's funny because when you press them and you get out of them exactly how do you think this is going to happen, it's always very compacted, and they have this sense that, Tuesday morning you're going to wake up and the poles are going to flip, and, the California's going in the ocean, and, Antarctica's going to thaw out and be a green paradise. And I think all these things are going to happen just like that, at the snap of a finger. And, if you step back and think about it, no, we're in the middle of this. It's already happening. Go on and if you don't believe this, look at the stats sometime for instance, for earthquakes, for volcanic activity. All these things are happening over the last, 10 or 20 years almost now, and it's just escalating more and more, and that's going to continue. The face of the planet is changing, and the consciousness is changing too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I totally agree. And as all those dimensions start merging into one, I mean, we're getting the parallel bleed through already, and I think part of those interdimensional beings and the other things that are happening are part of that bleed through effect from dimension to dimension, in my opinion, anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, can you believe we're almost finishing up around here? These are the fastest 2 hours I've been through, David. I'm so happy to have had you on
Yeah,
tonight. It's been a
went through pretty
pleasure.
fast.
Yeah, and I
Oh,
want
it's been
to.
great being on. Thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
it's just incredible, and I'd love to have you back. So whenever you feel guided to come back, you let me know. I just want to make a quick announcement. Just thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Everybody at Revolution Radio chat room and listeners, and join me next week when my special guest will be Renee Colson, and she's worked very closely with Dr. Eric Pearl. So she'll be discussing her work and what she's currently doing with energy and animal healing, among other things. And Dr. Eric Pearl is actually going to be he's coming on my show in December sometime. So, and also stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dunger and Mecky coming up next, of course, from Down Under to sail you on into the night. And David, is there anything else? Let's cover your website one more time and where people can buy your books.
Yeah, sure. The books are available at leprechaunpress.com. And you can follow more of my work at twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com. That is TWOCROWS paranormal.blogspot.com. There's a badge on there for Facebook. You're welcome to friend me on Facebook. I have a Twitter feed and everything else. And you'll see announcements on there for other books and more work that I have coming out. I make a lot of appearances at conferences and so forth. I'll be at the Paradigm Symposium in October. It's going to be an incredible event. It's in Minneapolis. I'll be in Texas in October doing a couple of events. I'll be in California in November. So I'm pretty much all over the place. And I love to meet people. If you see me in an event, please feel free to come up and say hello and introduce yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And then if they want to contact you with their story, they can obviously get you on those websites or the Facebook page, right?
They can. And, I love to hear people's accounts. So, yeah, by all means, feel free to send those in.
Okay. Excellent. All righty. Well, we're almost out of here. We got a few more minutes left. But is there anything else? Let me see here that I'd like to mention. Well, what is your do you have anything that you'd like to conclude insofar as any solution to the equation of what's happening on the world today? Briefly, kind of sum it up. Any advice for anybody?
Oh my gosh, key word is awareness.
Okay.
Stay aware and pay attention. Follow your signs and follow your guidance. However you perceive God, pay attention and just follow those signs, and you'll be guided to safe points for what we're all going through.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. I agree with that too.
So yeah, educate yourself, and turn off CNN and look at alternative sources, and don't get obsessed with it. It's very easy to do. I talk to people all the time that they can't stop listening to some of the alternative rants and continuous news flow and everything like that. So pace yourself out, and it can be a bit overwhelming if you're new to this arena.
Mm-hmm.
So step your way through it very carefully, but by all means build your awareness and your knowledge base.
I agree. Very well said. Yeah, it can be very toxic. You're right. Radio, to me, can be very toxic. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about that today. When people start talking nothing but negative all the time, it bothers me. I really just can't even deal with it. I'm like, I got to switch gears. So I can imagine what it does for other people.
I know, and it's funny, it's like, of course, one of the biggest alternative news sources is Alex Jones, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people just despise him as much as they despise CNN, but I can't listen to the guy. I don't know how people listen to him on a daily basis, because he's so extreme in the other direction that, right. I don't know how he hasn't given himself a breakdown.
Yeah, or a heart attack.
You listen to a few
cancel
minutes
that out.
of him,
But yeah,
it's
it's
just a heart attack, yeah.
Yeah, he's really stressed.
Yeah,
he's way out there. But,
but he's so far into it that he's completely overwhelmed.
Totally. Yeah, and it's toxic. It's totally toxic, but we know that. But
Yeah,
all right, David, thank you so much for being on the show, everybody. Have a great weekend, and I will see you next week.
Have a great night.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.